the Santa who takes more than gifts. I took the security job because I needed the money, and because nobody else wanted it. The mall sat just off a 2-lane road that cut through the mountains, the kind of place people only visited out of habit. It had been built in the 80s, back when the coal money was still flowing, and folks believed the future would keep showing up if they built enough parking spaces for it. By the time I got there, half the stores were empty, their windows covered in brown paper or sun-faded posters promising sales that never came. In winter, the place felt especially hollow, like it was holding its breath. I worked nights, mostly. Walked the halls, checked the doors, make sure nobody was sleeping in the old J.C. Penney wing. The heating barely worked, so the air always smelled like dust and old carpet, mixed with whatever cheap cinnamon cleaner the janitors used. December was supposed to be the busy season, but even then it was quiet. A few families came through for tradition's sake, letting their kids run around while they pretended things hadn't changed. That's why they still did the Santa thing. Management said it brought people in. They set up a booth in the center court every year, right under the skylight that leaked when it rained. Fake snow, plastic reindeer, a throne that had been patched so many times the red velvet showed different shades depending on where you looked. Most years, the Santa was a local guy, somebody's uncle, somebody's granddad. They joked, they waved, they took smoke breaks out back. The year I'm talking about, Santa just showed up. I remember seeing him for the first time on a Monday afternoon, right after Thanksgiving. I was leaning against the railing on the second floor, watching him get settled in. He already had the suit on, like he'd arrived dressed for the part. It fit him too well, the red deep and clean, the white trim bright, like fresh snow. His beard looked real, thick and gray, hanging low on his chest. What struck me most was how still he was, not stiff exactly, just settled, like he'd been sitting there a long time already. I went down to introduce myself, like I did with all the seasonal hires. He nodded when I said my name. When I asked his, he smiled but didn't answer. I figured maybe he was staying in character. Some Santas did that. I told him I was security, pointed out where the bathrooms were, where the break room was if he needed it. He listened, eyes on me the whole time. They were a pale blue, almost gray, and they didn't blink much. Up close he smelled strange, not bad exactly, just cold, like when you open a cellar door in winter and that old damp air rolls out. There was pine in it too, sharp and clean, but underneath was something earthy, something that reminded me of wet leaves pressed down for years. Kids started lining up almost immediately. That was another thing. Usually it took some coaxing. This time, from us, they drifted toward him on their own, tugging at their parents' hands. I watched a little girl, maybe 5, stare at him like she'd recognize someone she couldn't quite place. When it was her turn, she climbed up without hesitation and leaned into his chest like she'd done it before. I told myself I was reading too much into it. The job makes you paranoid. You're paid to notice things that don't quite fit. 3 days later, a boy went missing. His name was Tyler. I know that because I heard it over the radio when the call came in. The dispatcher's voice tight and clipped. He'd been last seen at the mall, sitting with Santa. His mother was frantic, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Police cars filled the parking lot, their lights washing the building in red and blue. They questioned everyone. Store clerks, janitors, me. They questioned Santa too. I stood nearby while they did it, leaning against a fake candy cane. Santa answered politely, calmly. He said the boy sat on his lap, told him what he wanted for Christmas, and left with his mother. He didn't remember anything unusual. His voice was low and even, the kind that made you lean in to hear better. When the officers asked his name, he gave one. I don't remember what it was now. It slid right out of my head as soon as he said it. They asked about cameras. Management admitted there weren't any in the booth. Parents complained they ruined the magic. The police weren't happy, but there wasn't much they could do. They searched the mall, the surrounding woods, the creek that ran behind the building. Nothing. The mall reopened the next day. That was when I started watching him. I noticed he never took breaks, never went to the bathroom, never ate the cookies parents brought. Sometimes they'd set a paper cup of coffee down for him, steam rising, and it would still be there hours later, untouched. At closing time, he stayed seated while the janitors worked around him. When I asked if he needed anything, he smiled and shook his head. We got our first real snow that week. Heavy, wet stuff that clung to your boots. I walked the perimeter that night, shining my flashlight along the service entrances. The snow was unbroken in places, smooth as a sheet. No footprints leading away from the mall. No footprints leading toward it either, except mine and the janitor's. Santa was already inside when I came back in. He always was. I told myself it meant nothing. He could have come in before the snow started. He could have left another way. But the unease settled in me anyway, like something I couldn't shake out. Another kid went missing 2 days later. A girl this time. 6. Same story. Last seen with Santa. Same questions. Same lack of answers. This time, people started whispering. Parents hovered close to their kids, eyes on the booth. Management talked about shutting it down, but Christmas was too close. They said it would cause panic. On Christmas Eve, the mall closed early. The few remaining shops pulled their gates down, metal rattling through the empty halls. The music kept playing, tinny carols echoing off tile and glass. I did my rounds, checking locks, listening to the hum of the old building settling. When I came back to the center court, Santa was still there. He hadn't moved. I stood at the edge of the fake snow, watching him. His hands rested on his knees. His head was slightly bowed. The lights from the tree cast shadows across his face, making his eyes look deeper, darker. I realized then I couldn't remember seeing him stand. Not once. I don't know why I approached him. Maybe I felt responsible. Maybe I wanted him to look at me and prove I was wrong about everything. I said his name, the one he'd given the police. He didn't respond. I took another step. The smell hit me stronger this time. Cold pine and rot, like a forest floor after the thaw. I said his name again, louder. Slowly, he lifted his head. He smiled. There was no warmth in it, no friendliness. It was a baring of teeth, more reflex than emotion. His eyes focused on me, like I was something he'd been waiting to notice. "You work late," he said. His voice sounded different up close, rougher, like it hadn't been used much. I told him the mall was closing, that it was time to pack up. He shook his head. "Some children don't go home on Christmas," he said, like he was stating a fact about the weather. I felt my mouth go dry. I told him that wasn't funny, that people were scared. He tilted his head. The movement was stiff, deliberate. "Some are taken because no one would notice," he said. "Some are taken because someone needs them." I asked him what he meant. He looked past me, toward the darkened hallways, the exits leading out into the mountains. "The cold takes many," he said. "So does hunger. So does being forgotten." I blinked. When I opened my eyes, the booth was empty. The chair sat bare under the lights. The suit, the beard, the bells, gone. The fake snow was disturbed, pressed down in places like something heavy had rested there. For a long time, I stood there until the music looped back to the beginning, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The next morning, another child was missing. Management called it coincidence, said there was no proof of anything. I turned in my badge and walked out without arguing. The mountains loomed gray and silent beyond the parking lot, snow clinging to the trees like old bones. I moved away the next spring, took a job in a different town, farther from the ridges. Life went on, mostly, but every December, when the nights get long and the air smells sharp and clean, I hear bells sometimes, soft at first, then closer. And I think about that mall, sitting empty in the mountains. I think about the kids who never came home. And I wonder who needed them more than the world they were taken from.